each of the signs has its own house. It only has one house that it belongs in. Now your Cancer sign here, if you notice, it doesn't have that line. And this tells me that there may, like, the moon rules the mother. And so this tells me that there may have been, some issues with the mother. Maybe the mother wasn't around. I'm not too sure about your mother's dynamics. The 12th house also does represent, it represents a lot of things like endings, closure. It's a very, very spiritual house. So you're very spiritually minded, 100%. But this is a very hidden house, and it rules Pisces, and Pisces is either the mystic guru, or they can get lost in drugs and try to escape. So I'm not sure if your mother was either a very spiritual person and maybe had some influence on you in that type of way, or if she possibly was not around and maybe drugs were possibly involved. Does that seem to relate to you at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very accurate.
The interesting thing here is we've got Saturn up here, and Saturn rules the father. And so the moon rules the mother. Saturn typically rules our father. And your Saturn's up here in the 10th house of career. So this makes you a very driven person. You are going to make sure that you succeed at whatever you do. You have that very, you're very strong-minded in that type of way for any type of pursuits that you want to take on. But the interesting thing here is that your Saturn at 28 degrees, it makes an exact opposition to this black moon Lilith here in your 4th house. So this kind of tells me that your father might have been really strict on you, or that he possibly just wasn't really around too much. Maybe he was a workaholic. He was working a lot. So that's the 10th house. Does that relate at all?
This is terrifyingly accurate, I'm telling you.
That's why I love astrology. The charts don't lie, you know what I mean? But so this shows that he was, very much a person that was very driven and very much at work a lot. And this seemed to have a little bit of a toll on your childhood and your family dynamic. And we get over here to Chiron, and Chiron, not that many astrologers talk about Chiron, but I do, because it's directly on my moon, and in my birth chart, it symbolized my mother's passing. And being here in your 5th house, this shows me that, you didn't really get to be a kid, really. You kind of had to grow up quick, or you really were restricted as a child, and you really didn't get to have, that type of energy that most kids want to just, be free and be a child. And because the 5th house here, if you see, it does represent, this is so blurry, I'm sorry. It does represent romance and love and fun and stuff like that, but it is the childlike essence of ourselves. So it's our joy, it's our spirit, and it's a very creative house, though. So there seems to be a wound in that area, and Chiron represents the wounded healer. And so that's what this is symbolizing here in your 5th house of childhood. And then you've also got Pluto here. Pluto is a representation of death and rebirth. And so there tends to be typically a bit of tragedy wherever Pluto is and determining the house. And then you've also got the vertex here. And the vertex is a symbol. It symbolizes, it's kind of like a black hole in astrology. So it's another kind of like bad luck spot in the birth chart. But this seems to be your house. Your 5th house of childhood kind of seemed to be a little bit deprived from you, and it seems like it may have been from the father, possibly adding to that dynamic, not really being there too often, and seeming like you may have had to grow up pretty quick, and also the absence of the mother in whatever sense. So there is that feeling that you kind of got robbed from your childhood. And I completely get that. I completely do, because like I explained my situation as well. But there is a great silver lining here, because Chiron represents the wounded healer. So most of these wounds are felt before the age of 18. After 18, we're able to take grasp of them, and really it's just like a scar that's left there, but we're able to transform from them. And so you're still young, so you know this is still obviously carrying on to you, but through this you have the ability to be such a healer and in the creative form. So this house represents children, and it also represents creativity. So this tells me that you have a very high artistic ability. And this right here, this little X, is called the part of fortune. It represents our good luck in astrology. And it's met up right there with your Pluto. So there is going to come a time to where your childhood and any sense of loss of creativity that you had as a child will have death and rebirth, like Pluto does give. And you know, the part of fortune here, like I said, brings good luck. So this is your house of relationships here, the seventh house. It does rule marriage, and it rules relationships in general. So the seventh house is all about our relationships and marriage and so on. And you've got the planet Uranus here, and Uranus is a little bit of a rebel. So Uranus is a bit of a rebel planet, and this shows me that you may tend to choose partners that are a little bit rebellious or just a little bit different from the norm. Like the norm typically bores you for the most part. And but you know, the adverse of this is you can possibly pair up with people that are somewhat careless or reckless at times. So that can be another thing that plays out with this Uranus being here. But you know, the fact that it makes a direct opposition again to your rising sign here, it tells me that, you know, sometimes you might put like rose colored glasses on and you kind of idolize your partner more so, and you end up kind of beating yourself down. Like you don't end up getting the top hand at the end of the day. You kind of, you know, put a lot of your energy around these people, and it could play off to where you're not, you know, gaining your own self-worth. Like you feel like you're kind of losing yourself in these partners that you pick. So that's another factor here with Uranus, is that you can typically kind of neglect your needs based on what your partner needs. It's like you're kind of all in for them. And if you notice, like you've got two houses here, or two of the same sign of the house of relationships. So I actually have this exact same placement. I have 2 here for the house of the 7th house of marriage, and 2 here for my first house of Leo. And so like for me, it's always been that way. It's been the same thing, to where it's like I get involved in relationships that aren't so healthy. That was my past. I've learned now through, when you turn 30, you go through something called your Saturn return, and your whole world changes. It's like, it's crazy because you don't want to get to the age 30. It's like, oh no, we're reaching 30. But then once you go through your Saturn return, it's like you are able to live again like a teenager. It's crazy. So a lot changes for the better after 30. But you know, you've got 2 houses here, or 2 of the sign of Aquarius here in your 7th house. So that kind of shows that you typically might just, you know, give a little bit more to your partner than you're receiving. And that can kind of leave you feeling a little bit out of the loop in a sense. And another reason I kind of say that too is because your Venus sign here is the sign of love. And being in Scorpio, you know, Scorpio is very penetrating. That's why it has that stinger. It wants the deepest soul connection of love. And that's exactly what it craves. It wants the deepest bit of love. And Scorpio literally represents sex in the zodiac. It's the only sign that represents sex. And so, you know, being here next to Chiron, it, you know, there may be some relationships that you get into that kind of wound you. And because this is that wounded healer, and this does represent our love life, you know, I kind of see that as, you know, being something that you just want to be careful of. You know, you might get stung by a few people a few times in your life, and relationships might not be the easiest, but at the core of your soul, the sun, you are a lover. So no matter what happens, you're always going to have relationships in your life. You're always going to attract them to you. Position that the moon can be in too. So you have a lot to offer when it comes to relationships, but you just need to be careful that, you know, you're not putting too much emphasis on the other person and idolizing them and not really, you know, understanding what your needs are. So that's just something you want to be careful of. Does that seem to make any sense? Or
Yep, I just learned that lesson for like the millionth time.
yes. So, you know, having Neptune here, Neptune tends to make us a little bit delusional. I have Neptune right on my sun. And so that's why, and it looks like an antenna. And the reason being is because it's Pisces ruling sign. And like I said, Pisces is the most spiritual of the zodiac. And it has that ability to tap into the spiritual realms that no other sign can tap into. And you have yours right here. It's at 29 degrees and 35 minutes. So it's literally just about to enter your seventh house of love and relationships. So in astrology, we consider it's already there for the most part. So you know, we can put that emphasis on others with those rose colored glasses, and then we kind of end up realizing who they are when it's too late. So that's something that, you know, you're gonna, once you're able to tap into your intuitive side more and your spiritual side, that's going to easily start to fade away. Like stuff is going to become so much more readily available for you, because you have a very spiritual chart with your 12th house moon with, and this factor too means that you love to help other people, especially when it comes to things like you're very, very empathetic. You might be an empath to where, do you take on people's energy pretty intensely?
Oh,
like
absolutely.
yeah. So I can see that 100% in your chart. Like you definitely, you know, you have that ability to tap into how others are feeling, but it can be so much so to where you're taking on their pain. And that's kind of the hard part with being an empath, and I get that energy completely. Is there anything you have any particular questions on?
Oh my god, I think you've answered anything I could have possibly thought of. Thank you so
Aw,
much. This is
you're
so helpful.
welcome. So
All
just
I can
keep.
say is just wow. Like
Aw.
truly magical.
Aw.
Way more than I was ever expecting or imagining. Like, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, that just makes me happy. So that's, you know, the whole reason I do astrology is just because it helped me realize that I wasn't crazy. I mean, I am crazy, but it helped me realize I'm not that crazy. It kind of showed me everything in my life that played out. And I'm like, okay, well, this was supposed to happen. This was supposed to happen. So just, you know, keep that in mind and know that you have so much power with creative things. You have power of knowledge. You're very spiritual. So use all of those gifts to your advantage. You're still young, so you've got a lot of time, but I would start to dive into any type of philosophical pursuits this next year, okay?
I've been researching so much stuff, just like you said, over the past like year and a half, 2 years.
There you go.
I
It's about to blow up even more.